Welcome to the Gus Alva Perspective, a video cast that's earmarked to embrace a mindset of gratitude and abundance over the flip side, which would be a mindset of fear and scarcity. It's very easy to hop on that particular wagon, but it's so much more gratifying and satisfying to do the exact opposite and hold gratitude near and dear. The topic that we're going to be touching on today is a very interesting question. And I'd like you to think about this as I ask it. What is your most important commodity? An interesting question because, as I've had an opportunity of actually reviewing this, it's one that may seem a bit surprising. So many people would think, wow, well, my most important commodity might actually be, again, some material thing that I have, whether that be money or a house or a vehicle or a different thing. But if we're thinking upon those are things that are replaceable. And if we think about things that aren't replaceable, then we really need to address this from a completely different perspective. And it's an interesting one because I'll share with you what I felt was my most important commodity. And I shared this with a very loved individual. My son once asked me, Dad, what is the most important commodity that you have? And I said, that's an easy one. And I said, that would be time. And my time is granted to you freely. And where I'm unfortunately encumbered by a lot of different responsibilities, I will always have time for you, regardless of anything that is coming up. And I'll always have that time for you. And he took that in sort of an interesting light. I think that it was almost underwhelming to receive that type of response. And I'd like you to think about this right now also. As a child, I can certainly recall days dragging on, forever and feeling, oh my God, this day's never going to end because I had so much time on my hands, literally, where I wasn't occupied. There's an adage that says that, the devil's playground is really idle time. And I think that does apply. There's almost a sense of boredom that sets in when we don't have certain projects that we're working on that occupy our time, in which now we're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm encumbered by the fact that I've got these limits with time and I'm not going to be able to accomplish everything that I set out to do. And it's interesting seeing how at different times in our lives, time can either drag on or move very quickly. And think about this, if you're out on vacation, you're out doing something fun, it seems like the day passes so quickly. And then subsequently, when you're doing something that you're just not interested or enthused about, it seems like time is dragging on forever. But the amazing thing is that, when we're held accountable to different things, that brings a whole different perspective to the things that we typically are engaged in. I'll give you another example of this very situation. A friend of mine invited me to, start participating in different types of physical activities, particularly triathlons, with hope to actually launch over into doing Ironman competitions. And immediately, you're kind of thinking about things and you're like, well, that's maybe a goal that's a little too lofty, but if you start working at those things, it's good to do that. But it's so easy to get caught up with so many different things and come up with excuses so as to not appropriately do things. In this case, obviously train to be able to meet up with the challenges that you subsequently need to do. And that is, cross sports related issues and the fact that they do require time. And if you're already constrained by time, by having to, accomplish different types of goals, whether you're in school or you're in a job setting and you're already circumscribed to different timeframes that you can't deviate from, then it's very easy to simply say, well, I just don't have the time to be able to do this. But it's important that sometimes people hold you accountable to things. And I was reminded of this very issue by this very dear friend. In fact, this past month, he sent me over a little snapshot of a Strava type of a recollection. And for those of you that might not know this, there's an application called Strava in which you can track your different types of physical activities, whether it be swimming, skiing, stand-up paddleboarding, kayaking, yoga, whatever it is. But there's almost an accountability factor that's driven in there. And his quip was, well, this is the Gus that I know always that, is staying consistent with his fitness. And I was struck by the fact that I had not necessarily been doing my typical runs and swims and cycling circuits. And it certainly was a poignant thing. And my immediate excuse was, I'm just so busy. I don't have the time to be able to actually get this accomplished, get this done. And it reminded me back of this discussion about the most important commodity that we have. And in this sense, we sometimes have to make adjustments on the fly. And it's very easy to come up with an excuse and a pretext to just simply not do. Where in reality, all we have to do is rearrange different things. For me, my family is exceedingly important. I never want to waste a minute without being able to be present for them. I'm very fortunate. I've got an incredible wife, and I've got 5 children that I was fortunate enough to have. And so for me, my family is critical. It's very important, and I want to make sure that I'm around for them as much as I possibly can be. My professional endeavors are also mixed and varied, and oftentimes I'm being asked to do a lot of different activities, which I juggle, and I do because I love having the opportunity of what I'm able to do. But that then means that my time gets even further more compressed. And so now you understand why my response to my son was the fact that time was my most valuable commodity. Money and cars and shelter and clothing and food, and all of those things are relatively straightforward to get to, but oftentimes the one limiting factor is always going to be time. From the very moment that we're born, we have the clock ticking on us, and we have a certain amount of time. And when we're young, we don't necessarily realize just how important that concept of that clock is. But just recently, I was reminded of this very issue because I was being held accountable for something that I promised that I'd be doing, and that would be joining in with activities with this dear friend to be able to maintain our physical fitness. And although we're not necessarily, again, receiving any type of, financial remuneration for, participating in, an event like a triathlon or an Ironman, it's important to stay true to oneself. But with that limit of time, it's very easy to come up with excuses and pretexts. But it's also important to keep in mind that we have to have gratitude in a sense of an understanding that if we're utilizing some of that very valuable time in a way in which we're investing in ourselves, because by the way, by training, that's sort of like a natural medication, right? If anyone has problems with either high blood pressure or diabetes or obesity, through appropriate diet, appropriate hydration, appropriate nutrition, and certainly exercise, one is literally buying time for themselves. And so rather than look back on this situation as, oh my gosh, I'm getting called out and, I'm just going to avoid, taking into consideration what's being suggested or asked of me, I just looked at it as a wonderful opportunity to remember that I've got this opportunity to be able to engage and do things. It just simply meant that I had to tweak time a little bit more, meaning then that rather than staying up late, maybe watching a show that really is not all that meaningful, maybe I could be going to bed a little bit earlier and waking up an hour earlier so as to be able to then take that swim for an hour and then a little run for a half hour and then be back home so that as my two young girls are getting up, I can still cook breakfast for them and spend time with them in a meaningful manner. Engage with my wife before I end up having to go either to the hospital or to the clinic or to do whatever thing. So, the interesting thing here, though, is that we sometimes prioritize different things in different ways, but it's really important to take a look at just the very basic elements that revolve around our lives. And in this sense, a nice recollection of the fact that I can certainly honor my son's memory with the thought that we had some pretty meaningful interactions and discussions and the opportunity of really testing things that are far reaching and important for us. Among those, the sense of family and love and loyalty, and the sense of purpose and a higher being, and our communities and our country and everything that revolves around us, but the things that we should be holding near and dear in our hearts. I thank you for sharing some time with me right now on the Gus Alva perspective. I hope you have a great day.